Hi and welcome to my channel. I started this small picture from Ivy and Inky butterfly in the beginning of October. I am sorry that you had to wait for almost a month for the second part, but sometimes for me, color a page from Johanna Basford book is much harder than to color half of the whole book of Tomislav Tomic. But I managed to do it. I finished this picture. I decided to start the second part from coloring the central and the brightest flower of the whole flower composition. I selected carmine as the first color. I put it in the center of the flower and closer to the central part. I press slightly harder on the pencil so color is more intense, and going to the central part of each petal, I try to apply less pressure to get paler pigment because I plan to leave the central part of petals uncolored white. For the tips of petals I selected fuchsia color, and again closer to the central part I tried to apply a very pale color, and closer to the tip I pressed harder so color is more intense. Next I decided to darken area around the central part of the flower, and I used Caput Mortuum Violet, the same color which I already used for the shading on orange flowers, which I colored in the first part. Link to the first part will be below in the info box. In this video I tried to add short explanation about coloring technique or about color choices each time when I started to color new element of this picture. I know that a lot of people switch off the music, the sound completely during color alongs, just like I do when I watch similar videos, so I simply wanted to mention that I added voiceovers in a couple of moments of this video. Now I decided to color big beautiful flower in the lower part of the flower composition. Maybe it's a rose, maybe it's some kind of dahlia. Anyway, I decided to use for this flower the same violet pencils which I already used for the pencils. Again, pencils I did in the first part. I started with the lightest violet shade, manganese violet. Here I try to leave the tip of the petal uncolored. And when I went to the second circle of petals, I also decided to leave a light area in the middle part of each petal, and I really think that it helped my petals to look more interesting. It's a pity that I missed a couple of petals and I covered them completely. On the third row of petals, I used manganese violet only closer to the tips of each petal, and for the inner part I used darker shade, purple violet. Difference isn't that big, but purple violet is slightly darker. On the couple of left petals, I didn't left this white uncolored stripe in the middle part of the petal, so don't do my mistake and leave this white stripe on all flower petals. On the next level of petals, I used purple violet closer to the edge of each petal, and for the inner part I will be using Delft blue. Again, I already used all those colors for the pansy flowers, so it creates a nice connection and a nice color balance for the flower composition. I would say that for now flower looks a little bit flat. I definitely want each level of petals to be more prominent. I want to create bigger difference between each row of petals. So I decided to darken areas where one circle of petals partly covers the next level. So closer to the base of each petal, I used black and dark indigo. I am not a huge lover of using black for the shading, especially on flowers, but sometimes it's necessary. And sometimes it's enough to use dark indigo, also a very helpful pencil for shading. I would say that it really helped me to add some volume to my flower. But still, in my opinion, flower looks a little bit boring. I definitely want to add at least one additional color. And it's nice that I have some uncolored areas on the petals, so there is a place where I can add this additional color. I decided that I will be using light magenta. Again, I already used this color for the flowers from the first part for those two pencils in the left upper corner. After a light magenta, I realized that I want even more brighter details on this flower, so I returned to fuchsia and added just some small areas on the closer to the tips of the petals on the upper and second layers. Next, I decided to switch to the letter and envelope. Color choice was quite easy. I think that cream color is quite suitable to show color of the parchment of the paper, so it's nice as a basic color for the letter. After that, I just thought about which colors I could use for shading, and I remembered about sanguine, which I already used in the first part, so it will be a nice color connection between different elements on the page when I use repeated colors. So sanguine it is for the shading on the letter. And on the envelope I decided to use pink color, one of the pinks which I used for the central flower. Again, pink is not a bad choice for the envelope, for the magical envelope for Ivy, and also it helped me to get better color balance on the composition. When you used some bright colors just like I did for the central flower, it's always nice if you can repeat the same colors for some small elements. I definitely plan to color at least a couple of those tiny flowers with these pink colors, and I also decided to add this pink to the envelope. Next, I thought about starting coloring leaves, but then I realized that I can't select colors for the leaves until I will do the background. I want central part of the background to be really dark and then gradually closer to the sides of my circle of my round frame. I want background color to be very pale, so I will need to do color gradient, and I also want to use green and blue colors for the background. I started with pine green. You know that it's one of the darkest greens in Polychromos set, but I wasn't quite happy. I definitely wanted darker background in the central part. That's why I first applied a layer of pine green and then covered it with indigo blue. And with mix of these two pigments, finally I was quite happy. Dark background really helped all flowers to pop up, and later you will see that closer to centers of flowers I even added a little bit of black to make even bigger contrast between flower color and color of the background. In the central part I pressed on the pencils, on pine green and on indigo blue quite hard. I really wanted to get rich deep colors and also to get nice opaque coverage, but then closer to the central part I started to apply less pressure on the pine green because later on this area I will be using another green color, so this area will be for mixing two green colors, and I didn't want to burnish paper already on the first layer of pigment. You can see here that I apply less pressure, so I get less intense, more transparent green color. I decided that for the leaves I will be using more warm yellow-green colors, and for the background more cold green colors. In my opinion, pine green is on the colder side of greens, and also earth green, which is definitely a green with a little bit of gray into it, and besides it's one of my favorite colors. That's why it will be my next color in this background gradient. Again, I try to use very light pressure. As I said, I want background to be quite pale, closer to the edges. I try to apply color especially around flowers, because dark background will help them to be more visible and not to be lost on such a very detailed flower composition. I thank you for watching this second part, and I hope to see you in the final one.